Hello, and welcome back to the Skift Travel Podcast. I am Skift's editor-in-chief, Sarah Kopit, joined, as always, with Seth Borko. Seth, how was your holiday? It's 2025.
Can you believe it's 2025 already? It was a great break. Skift offices closed between Christmas and New Year's, and I was with my parents in Florida, and the weather was so much nicer than in New York. How was your holiday, Sarah? Where were you?
I was up in the Catskills at the short-term rental that we seem to talk about quite a bit.
Always
So,
on duty. Travel industry never
yeah,
sleeps.
never sleeps, right? And so, yeah, so we were up there and it snowed a lot
Wow,
up there. Yeah,
nice,
so
beautiful.
we had a bunch of like really snowy cold days. I think it was really cold down here too, but it was exceptionally cold up there.
New York City never gets the really big snowbanks that you want from like the movies, the Hollywood style snowstorms. I'm glad you got that.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it was really nice. So, but I don't know. I'm also kind of one of those people who, when January comes around, like the tree is down, like I am ready to, I'm ready to stop eating. Is is
Yeah.
is really what it is. Like, let us get the cheese out of the house. Let us bring some vegetables in. Like, I don't know. Like, I need to get my routine back. I need to get my equilibrium back.
Yeah, I feel that too. Where stuff does start to accumulate, and come January 1st, you're just like, where did all this come from? All this food, all these people, all these decorations. What are we doing?
All this stuff. Gosh. Yeah. Anyway, I digress. This is like New York apartment style issues where like
That's
the
right.
boxes and the stuff become a real problem. So before we get into the pod today, just a quick reminder to send any questions or comments that you have to podcast@skip.com. And if you're not subscribing already, why not? Please do. And if you like us, give us 5 stars. We really appreciate that too. It lets us tell people about the Skift Travel Podcast. So, Seth, today we're going to talk about our prognostications. We're going to talk about how getting out the crystal ball, what our two teams have kind of picked for like the big travel concepts of 2025. We did a pod on Skift's megatrends back in December. Now it's time for the research outlook. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about what that is?
Yeah. So the research outlook is the research team's quantitative view for the year to come, what we think the big topics and ideas will be, but more importantly, we try and put some numbers behind it. We actually give some revenue estimates across different sectors and broadly for the entire industry. And so I think about it as kind of like the peanut butter and jelly of the outlook to the mega trends, where the
More
mega
food.
trend, what?
More food. Yeah, how about the carrots and ranch dip?
Yeah, yeah, or even yeah, exactly. The carrots and dip, the diet foods for your New Year's resolution for the new year ahead. Of the research team works with the edit team on creating the mega trends, and we love the mega trends. We read them very closely, and then we want to add a little bit of a quantitative overlay and say the mega trends are maybe a little more qualitative, like what are the big things we see coming down the pike, and what's based on the report, and what are we hearing from our sources. And our outlook is meant to complement that with a little more of a data-driven thing of what do analysts think growth will look like, what will revenues look like, and what are the big things driving these sectors. So that they come together in a diet-friendly sandwich for the new year ahead.
So if 2023 was like the year of revenge travel and 2024 was like the year of normalization, what's going on in 2025? Where'd you come out?
Yeah, I think it's more towards normalization for sure. Although the process we are normalized now. We're calling for a slow and steady growth rate for the year to come. So nothing crazy. And we said this last year, and it's going to be true again. Like, don't expect those big double-digit growth rates. For our outlook this year, we took two approaches. We always do look at sector estimates and what analysts think and what we think in terms of growth rates for sectors. So we give a revenue growth rate for online travel, for hotels, for airlines and cruise lines. So we look at the business side of things in terms of revenue growth. And this year we also did a consumer survey, and we asked people how much more they're going to spend. And we brought those two things together, and they really triangulate on like mid to high single digits, like in the 7 to 10% revenue growth range for the travel industry. So that's I mean, That's certainly not what we were seeing in 2023, but it's a long way from the pandemic too. So we're excited about that slow and steady growth. There's definitely some challenges, definitely some risks. We don't want to, gloss over those, but the challenges shouldn't be mistaken for like defeatism. We're optimistic about where we can go in 2025.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that good or bad?
I think as with everything in life, Sarah, it depends on your yardstick and on your benchmark. So, like, I think if uh, Sarah, in your past life, you were like a crypto. You covered the crypto kids, as you call them, I think, right?
I do, affectionately, all you
Affection.
crypto kids
Yeah,
listening
yeah.
to the Skift Travel podcast out there. But yes, the crypto kids.
Well, in crypto world, you don't get out of bed for a 20, 30, 40, 50% return, right? So to say like a 7 to 10% growth to crypto, that's nothing. But I want to contextualize that to more mature industries too, right? And so the International Monetary Fund, they're folks that I, really use as my benchmark. Obviously, they're very, very smart folks. They're calling for global GDP of 3.2%. And in developing nations like in the US, it could be even less than that. So to be growing in that 7 to 10% in a world of GDP of 3%, I think that is good. That's not high tech, fast growth, crypto, biotech, whatever. That's not 20, 30, 40% growth, but it's very respectable. And I think it makes us a high growth industry.
So this year we did a consumer survey as part of the Outlook. So, but that's new this year. I personally, I love it when the research team does consumer surveys. Like, it is like whenever I call Seth up and I'm like, "What do you got on like X topic?" and he's like, "Well, we have our survey." I'm always like dancing around. So, tell me about what the survey found.
Yeah. And as an aside, by the way, if you're a listener and you're a research subscriber or just a research fan, we're going to be doing more of those. We take Sarah's feedback very, very seriously. If we can delight Sarah, we want to do more of that. So we're going to be doing a lot more survey work in 2024 for real. And we were really excited to add it in because we wanted to blend, again, that supply side, you might call it, of the actual companies themselves with the demand side of what do consumers want. Our CEO, Rafat, likes to talk about consumers as the North Star for the industry. So we did a big survey, like a really big 1,600 folks in 5 different countries, which is actually a very big survey. We went out to the US, to the UK, to Germany, to China, and to India. So, obviously we can't do all around the world, but that's a pretty good sampling of like continental Europe, UK, which is kind of Europe, kind of not Europe, depends who you ask, United States, India, China. So again, that Asia Pacific flair. And in general, people were optimistic. I mean, travel remains a really important purchase for people. And we just asked, I mean, sometimes, you don't need to get overcomplicate the service. You can spend more next year. And how much more? The average people told us they're going to spend 9% more on travel. So that's what they have budgeted in. That's a really good number. Obviously, things can change, right? You can have a bad downturn in the summer and people cut their budgets, or, vice versa. People can move jobs and get new jobs and grow. But 9% is a really healthy number. They tell us they're going to travel more. They tell us they're going to spend more. And I think more importantly, they tell us that travel remains a huge priority in their lives.
I think that, it's funny. We were talking about maybe 2023 being the year of the revenge travel. I feel like we're still there, or I suppose that is the normal. Like, it just seems like everyone I talk to, it's just become a part, like an instrumental part of their lives. They are not willing to give it up, not for anything.
I think it's a great observation, Sarah. And I think you're right. I think it's the revenge travel mentality meeting the economic reality and also the reality of just year on year growth rates, which is that when you're from a big number, it's hard to grow. But I think you're right. I mean, I've been asked this question, and I think it's a similar vibe that's what you're saying, which is that travel, it seems so important to people. Has it transformed? Is it recession proof? And I think about that question a lot. My answer is no, it's not. I think that like at the end of the day, if you don't have a job, if you don't have a place to live, or you need to buy your groceries, you can't take a trip. That's just facts. But I think it's become about as recession proof as a discretionary item can become. And that's what we see in our surveys. We actually went in all 5 countries, and there's a lot of differences between those countries. One thing they all agreed on is we said, which discretionary expense are you most excited to spend on in 2025. We gave them a bunch of options. We said fine dining. We said electronics, AirPods, and we're cornered with AirPod gadgets, jewelry, wellness, fitness, like gym memberships. Across the board, everyone says the item they are most excited to spend on is travel. So it's definitely a discretionary item. And so any, economic hiccups are going to impact the industry. Don't fool yourself about that. But I think what you're speaking to, Sarah, and what our data, this is our job in research, is to find data to back up what the editorial team is seeing and hearing. I think what you're hearing is absolutely right, and that's how it shows up in our data. Is that like this is the expense that people remain 2023 levels of excited about travel within the constraints of what the economic forecast is going to bring for this year.
Yeah. So you brought up the regional differences. I'm curious, what were some of those?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly important here. I mean, if we just think in broad terms, so we asked this question, we said, all right, how much more are you going to spend next year? That's what I was leading with. The average was 9%, but there's a big disparity, not big, but a range. In the US and the UK, people said we're going to spend maybe 7% more. Germany and China were pretty spot on that average. They said they're going to spend 9% more. India said they're going to spend 14% more on travel next year. So a huge, huge, huge bright spot out of India, and even in general, a tilt towards Asia over maybe Europe and North America. I think that there is some risk to the Chinese numbers. There are some concerns about the Chinese economy, and we see some interesting data too, where when we ask people how important is international travel to you, Chinese travelers ranked at some of the lowest. So we're seeing we've reported on this before, how the Chinese domestic market is booming, but that outbound travel engine maybe isn't quite firing the same it was before the pandemic. So we're seeing some discrepancies there, and then not quite shown up in our data, but Sarah, we talked about this on multiple podcast episodes, like the Middle East. We didn't actually it's actually a little inside baseball here, but like it's actually very expensive to field surveys in the Middle East. It costs a lot of money. So we didn't get it. If you're listening from our friends in Saudi or Dubai or anywhere in the Middle East, it's not that we didn't want to survey you. It's that it's expensive to survey you. But
write to us. Tell us what you think. Podcast@skift.com. Yep. There you go.
It's a great plug. Yeah. Write to us. Tell us what you think. Give us some free survey responses. But we wrote that mega trend about how there's this massive cultural shift happening in the Middle East. The region is very much invested in tourism. People are behind it. So I think we're going to see one of the things that we see in our outlook and that jives with the mega trends is a lot of regional diversity, right? North America remains fairly strong economically. Europe has some challenges. Asia, not one size fits all. You've got real bright spots in India. And of course, you've got a bright spot in the Middle East. So I don't think this is a surprise necessarily to anyone, but I think it's always exciting to back up what we're seeing and in the world with data. And I think it just reinforces that, yes, this is the trend we're seeing.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you saw information that kind of backed up our Middle East megatrend. What about the others? What else do you find any data that lends itself to our other trends?
Absolutely. And we do, I will admit, a little bit go digging for data to support the megatrends. And it's great because we should be. I think one that stood out for me specifically from this consumer survey that we did. Again, it's a big survey globally, 1,600 people. We've been asking a lot of questions about social media. That was a big mega trend that we have about how influencers are transforming and will transform the travel industry again as we move from influencers to creators. Get that more organic, more video focused. So we asked about booking on social media. I mean, our surveys have long shown that social media is incredibly influential in how people discover and choose where they want to travel. We said, how comfortable are you with booking a trip directly via a social media platform? A third, 34%, a full third of people said very comfortable, and another 30% or so said somewhat comfortable. So you have a big majority, like 65% plus of people globally saying they're comfortable with making some sort of booking decision via social media, which I think is a really big sign of trust. We're seeing, just to tie it back to actual businesses, I know Klook, which is that big experiences online travel agency, they've been doing a lot of affiliate marketing via TikTok where you can book. There are some companies that are working on these sort of integrations. So we are absolutely seeing e-commerce trust creators move into e-commerce. These platforms build out e-commerce tools. And those e-commerce tools are in turn an extension of the trust and the influence that social media has. So we very much back that on up.
I feel like the only thing that needs to happen is that customers need to do it and have it work once.
Yeah.
It's kind of like anything else on the internet for those of us old enough to remember what it was like when e-commerce first, came out. It was like, what? Credit cards on the internet? How could we? But then, now 90% of the goods and services that come into the Copit household are delivered from Amazon. So,
And it's kind of funny. I'm sure I think you're probably right. That's a great analogy too, because Elon, one of his original businesses was PayPal, and that was all about how can you possibly ever trust someone to put a credit card information on the web? You'll have to have PayPal as this intermediary. Now it's just like throw that credit card information, take a picture of it, scan it, put it on the web. So
and what about sectors? Like, I don't know, let's start with online travel. What'd you see there?
well, we think that online travel will actually be one of the fastest growing sectors this year. So online travel had taken a bit of a backseat. We saw some shift towards more direct channels. Lots of, you might say, confusion coming out of the pandemic. And we think that this sector can grow really fast. We're estimating 9% revenue growth for 2024 and a similar, maybe 10% gross bookings growth. We think that this sector will get to almost $720 billion in gross bookings by the end of 2025. The sector is actually like a fairly small amount of revenue because they only earn about a 10% on average commission. That's across airlines and experiences and everything. But it's a really exciting sector for us. Pranavi, who we've had on the podcast before, is our senior research analyst who really covers that sector. And she identified fragmentation as the real key theme. And you heard her on the Direct Bookings podcast and in many other places talking about this theme of just a lot more competition, right? We're seeing new entrants, some social media led, some like large banks, more competition from loyalty, big changes happening in Google and how search is done, how it's regulated. By the way, another mega trend about how search is transforming, and another mega trend we've talked about regulatory as well. So we're seeing all these changes, all these mega trends come together and actually, apply those shifts to how the businesses are done. At the same time, as we talk about technology and all this stuff, the OTAs are some of the technology leaders. They're some of the marketing leaders. They're some of the most able to monopolize on social media trends. I mentioned Klook. Booking has done a TikTok integration. Expedia does a lot of advertising on YouTube and Meta. So as we talk about these trends, there's pushes and pulls always. Search is transforming, but a lot of interesting stuff happening here. And then the other big interesting trend in this space is the transformation of those B2B marketplaces. And so you're seeing the new entrants, but in many ways, those new entrants are just being fed by B2B sales via Expedia. Arian Gorin, who was the CEO of Expedia now, kind of cut her teeth at Expedia doing some of that B2B stuff as well. So we're definitely seeing a lot of interesting things happen, more fragmentation, changes in search, adoption of technology. Booking.com is really pushing that connected trip. I know we've talked about it for many, many years now, but this could be the year. And I think, genuinely, I say that somewhat jokingly, but in all earnestness for our Booking.com fans and listeners, they are making progress and making strides. And it's coming at a really interesting time in the travel industry.
What about hotels and short-term rentals, like the other accommodations?
We're calling for hotels to cross almost $1 trillion in room revenue in 2025, which is huge landmark, really, really big number. And again, I think we've got the mega trends really speak to some of the things that are happening there. Our data, and we are reporting on and researching on much of the publicly available STR data in terms of RevPAR and occupancy data. There is a lot of stability in the luxury space. Occupancies remain low, but pricing power remains very strong. That is supported by the quiet luxury megatrend. And we're seeing a lot of shifts in how loyalty is done. This is a topic that Skift Research intends to really do a lot of work and research on, is how loyalty continues to transform into 2025. It's just been such a big topic. Loyalty was the number one tool that hotels have used to drive direct bookings, which again we talked about in the past podcast. And are we reaching a point of saturation? Is loyalty as effective as it can continue to be? And if it continues to be effective, then what hope do independent hotels really have to compete against these powerful tools, and what are the options out there? We also think that one of the other megatrends that Sean O'Neill covered so well is about ancillary revenue. This has taken a piece out of the airlines' playbook and selling things beyond just hotel rooms, monetizing lobby space, pool space, and that's going to drive. So we quoted revenue in terms of room revenue, but actually the industry revenue can be substantially higher.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of that with what you just said reminds me of the airline space. BA just changed their loyalty program, and there was a huge amount of backlash, very similar to Delta. Like,
And we had that episode, we talked with the airline folks about that backlash specifically and the Delta stuff. I mean, yeah, totally. We are going to see big shifts in loyalty. And I think in many ways, the airlines are some of the canary in the coal mine. They adopted loyalty before the hotels did. The hotels have followed suit. They adopted ancillary before the hotels did. You do have to question if the hotels are getting in too late. Like, just as the U.S. cracks down on junk fees, the hotels are like, let's sell more fees. Let's add resort fees. Let's add these fees. So you do got to wonder if like there's a bit of that there. And I would add, we did some work in the outlook on short-term rentals as well. Short-term rentals was the darling of the travel industry. It was the only sector that saw really, really strong growth during the pandemic because people wanted space. They wanted that more controlled experience. It's gonna be it's not bad, much more moderate growth of the short-term rental industry, a lot more consolidation and a lot more of maybe something of a hangover from those hyper growth we just saw the Casa sell to Casa Go. And when you talk about, I think that signals some really big shifts to come. They're still on that professionalization journey. They're at growth parity with hotels in our estimates, both at about like 6% year-over-year growth. And if you look at the short-term rentals, and we did a survey last year, we did I thought a really nice survey on, like, are we at a tipping point in short-term rentals that Sonia Zanpour, one of our analysts, did. And she found the biggest pain point for short-term rentals was junk fees and cleaning fees. And that, like, what am I doing with all these cleaning fees? So it's funny that we're seeing a crackdown on junk fees in airlines. We're seeing complaints about cleaning fees in short-term rentals, and hotels are like, our next big revenue opportunity is ancillary revenue. It's like, well,
yeah.
There's some challenges there for sure, right?
Yeah, it's like, who's going to want to do the Spirit airline of hotels? I don't know. But speaking of airlines, what were the big, like, high level takeaways in the airline sector?
Yeah, I mean, so airlines are set for growth. We have them at some of the relatively slower growth. We're actually based off of the IATA forecast for the airline sector, and they're calling for 4% passenger revenue growth to about $700 billion in passenger revenue. The industry itself is set to surpass the $1 trillion mark as well, alongside hotels. But you have to remember that airlines do, I mean, it doesn't feel like it's nice, but they actually do sell more than just passenger tickets. There's a big cargo business. There's ancillary revenues. There's some airlines have maintenance businesses. Delta happens to own an oil refinery. So the industry as a whole set to pass the $1 trillion mark, but we put in our outlook the passenger revenue figure, which is set to cross the $700 billion mark. That's definitely that's definitely a full recovery from the pandemic. Airlines have definitely seen somewhat of a lag in the recovery, and that's partially because of Asia. Like, it doesn't feel like it here in the US. If you tried to book a flight over the holidays, it's like, what do you mean they're lagging? Aren't we always talking about premium? And it's true, but there is some regional differences, especially again, the Chinese aviation market being a really big question mark. But within the US, I mean, a lot of change. We think Ashab, who's our analyst, he talked very closely with Jay and Gordon. So these are not like fully independent things. He highlighted ongoing mergers happening in the space. We know Alaska's working on a merger with Hawaiian. We know the European aviation market, there's some potential bids and mergers happening there. Even Air France, who we spoke to, Ben Smith, has his eyes on some folks that will continue to happen in Asia as well. There's probably need for consolidation. our mega trend on the space was about first class is back. And um, Gordon scolded me and corrected me and told me the trend is not about business class, it's about first class, Seth. And that's true. Our bigger view from the outlook, though, is about premium. And that includes the premium economy that peasants like, or middle class peasants like myself can afford, not the first class experience. And that continues to grow. Spirit restructuring, lots of challenges in the low cost space, especially in North America. And Delta's president Glenn Howenstein is like, he says premium cabin revenues at Delta are going to exceed main cabin revenues by 2027. So first class will help with some of that, but it's also the rest of those premium seats as well. So continued demand, continued growth. There are more than one way to get around, right? Like the reason why you can have hotel growth higher than airline growth is because there's also, you know, uh, trains, automobiles, all sorts of other ways to get to your destination. So overall positive for the year. And you can kind of see where we're looking at 9% here, 6% here, 4% here. We're triangulating on that number where we don't necessarily have like a single number for the entire hotel industry or for the entire, hotel industry, for the entire travel industry. But the point is that it should be another positive year, slow and steady, regional divergences and those mega trends and other key trends kind of driving those intra-sector dynamics is now we've covered a lot of the outlook at this point.
I still aspire to fly first class. There's just something wrong that I've never done it. I think we need to figure out a way to make that happen somehow. But I digress.
We must have a podcast listener who could make that happen, though, right? Again, if you've got to email Seth with survey results, email Sarah with first class tickets, and
There you go. And that's how it should be, actually. Like if we want to like break up who gets what, there you
yeah,
go.
that's right.
So, Seth, in the outlook, what was the most surprising result that you found? Like the thing that where you just kind of were like, well, that's a head scratcher. I didn't expect that to turn out this way, whether from the survey or otherwise.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. So we did some questions on the consumer side of things, and I liked a lot of those results. Were maybe not huge surprises, but I was a little delighted by them. I was pleased by them. I would say the one where the one I already mentioned, where travel came out as the top discretionary expense in all 5 countries, that felt like, I mean, literally like a jackpot where you get the cherries to line up. Where I was expecting one of them to not be like, it's never that perfect, and it was that perfect. That was exciting for me. We saw really high rates of leisure travel. We asked about, are you going to take more blended trips? And there was a piece of me, and maybe it's like kind of, the news side of us, where we're like, that's an old trend, old story. We've done that story. Move on. Do you see yourself combining business and leisure more frequently in 2025 compared to 2024? 70% of people in the US said yes, more frequent business trips. And that was the lowest. In China, it was almost 90%. So,
I think personally, I feel like it's one of those things where now we even ask that question, but very soon it's not even going to be a question to ask. Like it would, I mean, I know we have kind of unusual jobs, but it would never even occur to me to not kind of like be moderately working on vacation or to like be or I mean it's just because all you need is a Wi-Fi connection. I mean that's all you do. And so it's just for so-called white collar workers who work off a laptop anyway. It just kind of makes sense
yeah,
that everyone would do that.
yeah, it does, it makes perfect sense. And I guess maybe a listener's like, this, what are you thinking, Seth? Of course that was obvious. I don't know, there's a part of me with all the return to office stuff that expected it to go down, and it didn't. I think another one, we asked a question, actually that was a fun question, and I got to give full credit on my team to Varsha Aurora, who's our research manager who runs our survey programs, and she asked this question. It was just a fun one. And she asked travel goals, which I love. We do like report, we sometimes do stories on this. And she asked us, 2025 will be your year of, blank. We gave them a couple of different options and let people kind of self-define, like, this is my travel year of, and exploring new destinations was absolutely number one. And I love that. We had other options like revisited favorites, or even some other, either ones like eco and sustainable travel, which did not rank as highly. So I don't love that eco didn't rank as highly, but I like that people feel inclined to explore this year. Like 18%, and there's a lot of, this is a select all that apply. 18% said new destinations versus 10% revisited favorites. So, I mean, it doesn't feel like a lot, but it is a big swing in favor of that. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that. And I think it ties in with some of the stuff that we've talked about. Like I'm really excited about the new routes to Greenland. So I keep telling my fiance, like, we got to go to New Greenland. It's something I really want to do. And I love to see that spirit of exploration, and not just the same old come through in our work for the outlook for next year. That excites me a lot.
Thank you for listening to the Skift Travel Podcast. Wherever you're listening, please make sure to subscribe. If you like what you're hearing, rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review. It really helps get the word out about us, our podcast, and make sure that we can still continue to bring it to you free of charge every week.
If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell as well. That way you'll know every time we have a new episode.